In the heart of Seattle's plaza, where neon lights painted liquid reflections across wet pavement, Alexandra Sterling stood like a monument to corporate power. Platinum blonde waves cascaded over the sharp lines of her red V-neck dress as she hurled a set of keys toward the janitor. "Fly this helicopter, and I'll marry you." Her lips curled into a smirk beneath a forest of camera lenses. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Liam Carter stepped into the cockpit, silent, methodical, his fingers moving across the instrument panel like muscle memory. The engine breathed hard. Rotor blades carved wind. Warning lights flashed red, then died. The Helion V9 lifted off the ground. Alexandra stood frozen, as if staring at her own reflection in a mirror from another life. Why would a janitor handle controls like a special operations pilot? And why did Alexandra tremble before her own mocking dare? Sterling Aviation had built its reputation on pioneering high-end rotorcraft, and the Helion V9 launch event would determine the valuation of their secondary IPO. The company's board of directors had made it clear to Alexandra. There was no room for error. Not tonight. Not with federal military contracts hanging in the balance, and competitors circling like vultures. The prototype helicopter gleamed under stadium lights in the center of the plaza, its carbon fiber body reflecting the ambitions of everyone watching. Behind the scenes, Damian Cross stood in shadows, his tall frame draped in a silver-gray suit that matched the coldness in his eyes. His slicked-back blonde hair caught the light as he checked his phone, waiting. He had spent months positioning his own company to swallow Sterling Aviation whole. Tonight's event was supposed to collapse under the weight of technical failure. He had made sure of it. Alexandra Sterling carried herself with the rigid discipline of someone who had clawed her way to the top through sheer force of will. At 34, she had transformed her father's military contracting legacy into a civilian aviation empire. Her platinum blonde hair and red power dress had become her signature, a brand identity she wore like armor. But beneath the polished exterior, a thin scar traced the line of her collarbone, a souvenir from 10 years ago that she kept hidden beneath silk and makeup. She had learned early that capability equaled credentials and pedigree. Kindness was a luxury she could not afford. Her core belief had calcified into doctrine. The world sorted itself into those who commanded and those who obeyed. Intelligence was measured by diplomas on walls and family names in business journals. She had never questioned this hierarchy until tonight. Liam Carter moved through the venue with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to being invisible. At 36, he kept his hair short, his movements economical. Most people saw only the janitorial uniform and assumed nothing. They did not notice how his eyes tracked wind direction through the open plaza, how he registered the flutter of flags, the smell of aviation fuel hanging in the cool evening air. These were habits carved deep, reflexes from another life. He lived in a small apartment on the east side, where rent was cheap and windows faced west to catch the prevailing breeze. Most nights he came home late, helped his 8-year-old son Ethan with homework, then sat at the kitchen table, assembling miniature rotor models from scrap materials. His hands bore calluses on the index finger and knuckles, the kind that came from gripping cyclic controls for hours. His wrists moved with a flexibility that spoke of thousands of hours, managing collective pitch in turbulent air. Ethan was his entire world. The boy was bright, curious, obsessed with how things flew, but he was also sick. A congenital heart defect had required 2 surgeries already, and a third loomed on the horizon, perpetually delayed by insurance complications and hospital scheduling. Liam worked double shifts to cover what the coverage would not. The central theme of this story was simple: never underestimate the quiet ones. The helicopter represented freedom and responsibility, memory and redemption, all spinning on the same axis. The launch event had been progressing smoothly until the demonstration moment arrived. The lead engineer climbed into the V9's cockpit, initiated the startup sequence, and watched in horror as the instrument panel displayed a cascade of error codes. The start sequence had been scrambled. What should have been a simple ignition protocol had become a digital maze. The engineer climbed back out, his face pale, and whispered urgently into the project manager's ear. Cameras zoomed in. Journalists leaned forward. Alexandra felt the night beginning to slip through her fingers like water. Her jaw tightened. This was supposed to be flawless. This was supposed to prove Sterling Aviation belonged at the table with the defense industry giants. Instead, she was watching her company's future stall on the launch pad. Frustration boiled over into contempt. Her eyes swept across the assembled staff and landed on Liam, who stood near the maintenance cart, his expression neutral. Something about his composure irritated her. He looked too calm, too unbothered by the chaos unfolding around them. In that moment, she made a decision that would alter everything. "Maybe we should let the janitor try," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "He might figure it out faster than our engineers." Laughter rippled through the crowd again, but this time it had an edge. She pulled the V9 keys from her pocket and tossed them in his direction. "Fly this helicopter and I'll marry you." The crowd erupted in laughter and applause. It was meant to be a joke, a way to diffuse tension with absurdist humor. Alexandra smiled for the cameras, already imagining how this would play in tomorrow's press coverage. She had created a meme, a moment of levity, to overshadow the technical glitch. She felt clever. Liam caught the keys without looking. He stood still for 3 full seconds, weighing options that no one else could see. Then he walked toward the helicopter. His movements were unhurried, but precise. He opened the cockpit door, settled into the pilot's seat, and began a visual scan of the instrument panel. His fingers moved across switches and dials with the confidence of someone who had done this 10,000 times before. He tapped the boost pump, reset the FADEC computer, adjusted the bleed air valve, cross-checked oil pressure. 0.7 of a second to read the error pattern. Another 2 seconds to reverse the scrambled sequence. He brought the turbine online, felt the shudder as combustion stabilized, heard the rotor begin its slow acceleration. The collective pitch came up smooth. The V9 lifted 2 meters off the ground, hovered steady despite a crosswind, executed a gentle yaw left and right, then settled back onto the pad with barely a whisper of contact. The entire flight lasted less than 90 seconds. The crowd had gone silent. Cameras continued rolling, but no one laughed now. They had just witnessed something impossible. A janitor had flown a prototype military helicopter on its first public demonstration, with no briefing, no preparation, and no visible effort. Alexandra stood frozen, her smile fading into something between shock and recognition. There was something familiar in the way he moved, in the economy of motion, in the quiet authority he had shown in that cockpit. It clawed at the edges of her memory, like a name she could not quite recall. The video went viral within the hour. Janitor flies prototype helicopter became the headline that overshadowed every carefully crafted press release Sterling Aviation had prepared. Social media exploded with speculation, memes, and conspiracy theories. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting. The public relations team scrambled to manage a narrative that had spun wildly out of their control. And Alexandra Sterling began to obsess over a single question. Who was Liam Carter? She pulled his personnel file that same night. It was surprisingly thin. Education. High school diploma. Previous employment. Listed only as prior service. With no details. References. Minimal. Background check. Clean. It was too clean. Too sparse. Someone had scrubbed this file, removed details, left only the barest skeleton of a history. There were gaps in his timeline that made no sense. Entire years unaccounted for. His resume suggested he had worked in building maintenance for the last decade, but there was no trail of previous employers, no progression, no story. It was the profile of someone who had deliberately erased themselves. She assigned her head of security to dig deeper. The answer came back, frustrating. Liam Carter existed on paper, paid taxes, had a clean record, and left no footprints. Whoever he had been before becoming a janitor, he had buried that person thoroughly. Meanwhile, Liam's life continued in its quiet rhythm. He finished his late shift, walked home through streets still damp from evening rain, climbed 3 flights of stairs to his apartment. Ethan was asleep on the couch. Schoolbooks scattered around him. Liam carried his son to bed, then sat at the kitchen table repairing a small oxygen pump he had bought secondhand for Ethan's nebulizer treatments. The apartment was modest but organized. 1 bedroom, a narrow kitchen. A living room with windows that caught the prevailing westerlies. Wind chimes hung outside, their metal tubes creating soft harmonic notes whenever the breeze picked up. The sound reminded him of something he tried not to think about. The next morning, he called the insurance company again about Ethan's surgery. It had been postponed twice already, due to administrative review and network approval processes. The hospital had given him a tentative date, but nothing was confirmed. He kept his voice even on the phone, explained the situation for the 11th time, and was told someone would call him back. The first intersection between their worlds happened by accident. Alexandra worked late, reviewing the post-event analysis, left the building near midnight, and walked toward the executive parking garage. She heard it before she saw it. The sharp, labored breathing of someone struggling for air. Ethan was leaning against a concrete pillar near the maintenance staff parking area, his small chest heaving, lips tinged blue in the fluorescent light. Liam was beside him, calm but urgent, talking in a low, steady voice, guiding the boy through breathing exercises. Alexandra did not hesitate. Her years of emergency response training from her father's military drills kicked in. She knelt beside the boy, assessed his condition, pulled her phone, and called the company's medical liaison. Within 8 minutes, a Sterling aviation vehicle arrived to transport them to the affiliated hospital across town. Liam looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. Gratitude mixed with wariness. "I'll pay you back," he said quietly. "Don't be ridiculous," she replied, sharper than she intended. "Just take care of your son." But Liam shook his head. "I handle my own debts." The refusal irritated her. She was offering help, and he was drawing boundaries. Yet beneath the irritation, something else stirred. Respect. This man had principles that did not bend even under pressure. He maintained his dignity, even when accepting assistance would have been easier. At the hospital, while Ethan was being examined, Alexandra waited in the corridor. She did not know why. She told herself it was corporate liability, making sure an employee's family was taken care of. But that was a lie. And she knew it. Ethan emerged from the examination room with color returning to his face. He saw Alexandra and smiled. "Your hair looks like sunshine on clouds," he said. "Are you scared of flying?" The question hit her like a slap. She froze. Her hand instinctively moved to the scar on her collarbone, hidden beneath fabric. "Why would you ask that?" Ethan shrugged. "Dad says people who don't fly anymore are usually scared, but you run a helicopter company, so I thought maybe you still fly." "I don't," Alexandra said. The words came out harder than intended. "Not anymore." She left before the boy could ask why. But as she walked to her car, she heard it again. The phantom sound of rotor blades cutting through smoke, the scream of metal tearing, the weight of someone's arms carrying her through fire. 10 years ago. A memory she had locked away so thoroughly, she had almost convinced herself it was a dream. The pieces began falling into place when one of General Sterling's former aides reached out. He had seen the viral video and recognized something in Liam's flight profile. He made a phone call. Files were pulled. A name surfaced from a classified after-action report. Lieutenant Liam Carter. H-SAR Unit. Helicopter Search and Rescue. Special Operations. General Sterling, Alexandra's father, had his own version of events. He sat in his study, surrounded by commendations and photographs from 3 decades of military service, and delivered his verdict with absolute certainty. That man ruined a mission 10 years ago. 5 people died because of his failure. He took a dishonorable discharge and disappeared. You need to fire him immediately. But Alexandra had learned to question her father's absolutes. She began pulling records herself. The official report was sanitized, vague, full of passive voice and bureaucratic language. But reading between the lines, she found inconsistencies, timelines that did not match, decisions attributed to Liam that seemed to contradict radio logs. She found one witness still in contact with military archives, a retired warrant officer who had been on the ground during the incident. He agreed to speak off the record. The mission was compromised from the start, he told her. Command sent contradictory orders. The extraction window kept shifting. Carter was ordered to land in a hot zone, knew it was suicide, and refused. He was right. The ground team got pinned down, and we lost 5 operators. But it wasn't his call that killed them. It was the orders from above. Then why did he take the blame? Because someone had to, and he volunteered. Said the families needed closure more than he needed vindication. So he accepted the discipline, signed the paperwork, and walked away. Saved a lot of careers by doing it. Alexandra felt something crack open inside her chest. She had spent 10 years believing competence came from credentials and pedigree. But this man had sacrificed his entire career to protect the truth, to give families peace, to shoulder blame that was not his. She began cross-referencing dates. 10 years ago, the same year as her accident, she had been a guest on a military demonstration flight. A gesture of goodwill between Sterling Aviation and the Department of Defense. The helicopter had suffered catastrophic mechanical failure mid-flight. Fire in the engine compartment. Smoke filling the cabin. She remembered the sensation of falling. The heat. The impossibility of escape. And then, hands. Strong hands pulling her from the wreckage. A voice telling her to stay low. Stay calm. Stay with me. She had looked up into a face she barely registered through shock and smoke. But now, staring at Liam's personnel photo, she saw it. The same eyes. The same calm intensity. He had saved her life. And she had mocked him in front of the world. The confrontation came in the empty hangar 3 nights later. Alexandra found him inspecting the maintenance logs, making notes on a clipboard. She waited until he noticed her. Then spoke without preamble. 10 years ago. The crash. That was you, wasn't it? Liam did not look up. I don't know what you're talking about. You pulled me out of that helicopter. He set down the clipboard. When he met her eyes, his expression was unreadable. That person is dead. Died with his unit. Let him rest. Why didn't you say anything? Why did you let me? She could not finish the sentence. Why did you let me humiliate you? Because it doesn't matter, he said quietly. You needed someone to mock. I needed a job. We both got what we needed. That's not good enough. It's all you're getting. She took a step closer. My father says you failed. That you're responsible for 5 deaths. For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Pain. Old and deep. Your father needs someone to blame. That's fine. I gave him that. But it's not true. Truth is expensive. Not everyone can afford it. Alexandra wanted to scream. She wanted to shake him, to force him to defend himself, to fight back. Instead, she asked the only question that mattered. Why? Because those families needed to bury someone's mistake. And the people who actually made the calls had families too. I didn't. So, I paid the bill. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. For what it's worth, Liam said, you've built something good here. Sterling Aviation matters. Don't let people like me drag it down. People like you? Alexandra's voice cracked. You're the most honorable person I've ever met. He smiled, but it was sad. You should meet better people. That same week, evidence began surfacing of something darker beneath Sterling Aviation's pristine surface. Someone had been tampering with the V9 systems, introducing subtle errors designed to cause catastrophic failure during public demonstrations. The scrambled start sequence at the launch event had been deliberate sabotage. Liam noticed it first. As part of his janitorial duties, he had access to the engineering labs after hours. He saw details others missed. Fresh flux residue on circuit boards that should have been sealed months ago. Purchase orders for microcontrollers that were not part of the official build manifest. Security footage with convenient gaps during late-night lab access. He began piecing together a timeline. The modifications had been introduced gradually over 6 weeks, each change small enough to avoid detection but collectively lethal. The malware embedded in the FADEC system was sophisticated, designed to activate only under specific flight conditions. It would make the crash look like pilot error or design flaw, either of which would destroy Sterling Aviation's reputation and federal contracts. Liam tracked the supply chain for the unauthorized components, and found a shell company registered in Delaware. 3 layers of corporate ownership led back to one name: Damian Cross. Cross ran a rival aerospace firm that specialized in military drones and unmanned systems. He had been positioning his company to acquire Sterling Aviation's contracts for years, but Alexandra's leadership had kept him at bay. The V9 represented a technological leap that would cement Sterling's dominance for a decade. Damian could not let that happen. Liam began gathering evidence, photographing serial numbers, documenting access logs. He copied security footage to an external drive and stored it in a locker at the bus station downtown. But he was not careful enough. Damian's people had been watching. The confrontation happened in a container yard near the port. Liam had followed a lead on one of the engineers he suspected of being on Damian's payroll. He was checking invoice numbers on shipping manifests when 3 men appeared from between the container stacks. They did not waste time with threats. The fight was brief and brutal. Liam had combat training, but he was outnumbered, and they had expected him. He managed to break free, taking a deep gash across his shoulder in the process, but he kept the memory card clutched in his fist. The security footage from the lab. The evidence he needed. He made it back to his apartment, bled through 2 towels, and used a stapler to close the worst of the wound. He did not go to a hospital. Hospitals asked questions. Instead, he cleaned the injury with alcohol, wrapped it tight, and spent the rest of the night uploading the footage to an encrypted cloud server. The next morning, Alexandra saw the injury. He had been careless, and his shirt sleeve rode up while he was reaching for a ceiling vent during his maintenance rounds. The crude staples were visible, the skin around them angry and inflamed. She did not ask permission. She simply told him to come with her, drove him to a private clinic that Sterling Aviation kept on retainer, and waited while a doctor cleaned and properly sutured the wound. When Liam tried to protest, she cut him off. "I need you functional. This is a business decision." But it was not, and they both knew it. Later that evening, in the quiet of the clinic's recovery room, Alexandra cleaned the surgical site herself while the nurse prepared discharge paperwork. Her hands were steady, professional, but something had shifted in the air between them. They were no longer CEO and janitor. They were 2 people who had survived things that should have killed them. "I'm afraid of rotors," she said suddenly. The confession came without warning, without preamble. "I haven't been in a helicopter since the crash. I dream about the sound, the blades cutting through air. It's like drowning in noise." Liam was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Fear means you're still alive. It means you remember what matters. What do I do with it? You fly anyway. Or you don't. But you stop pretending it doesn't exist." She looked at him, really looked, and saw past the uniform and the silence to the man beneath. Someone who had chosen truth over comfort, honor over recognition. Someone who understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. "If I had to choose," she said slowly, "between saving the company and saving you, I'd choose you." He met her eyes. "That's a terrible business decision." "I know." The promise hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. They had crossed a line. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The next morning, Liam presented her with the evidence. The ghost malware code. The shipping manifests. The security footage showing an engineer working after midnight to modify the V9's control systems. The paper trail leading back to Damian Cross. Alexandra studied the files in silence. Taking this to the authorities meant exposing vulnerabilities in their security, admitting their flagship product had been compromised, and potentially triggering lawsuits and investigations that could cripple the company. The board would never approve, but doing nothing meant letting sabotage go unpunished and leaving her people vulnerable to future attacks. She made the decision in less than a minute. "We bring this to the FBI and the Federal Aviation Administration today. The board will fight you. Let them try." It was the first time in her life she had chosen truth over image, principle over profit. And it was terrifying. But Liam stood beside her as she made the calls, silent and steady. And somehow that made it possible. The plan unraveled 3 days later when military officials scheduled a closed demonstration of the V9 for a select group of defense procurement officers. The weather forecast showed a storm rolling in from the Pacific, but the brass insisted on maintaining the schedule. Political pressures, budget cycles, bureaucratic momentum that could not be stopped. Alexandra wanted to cancel. Every instinct screamed at her to ground the aircraft, to wait for better conditions. But the board overruled her. This demonstration represented $200 million in contracts. They could not afford to show weakness or hesitation. She climbed into the pilot's seat herself. If the company was going to sink or swim on this flight, she would be the one at the controls. She had not flown in 10 years, but she was still rated, still certified. The fear sat in her chest like a stone, but she ignored it. This was her company. Her responsibility. The V9 lifted smoothly. For the first 60 seconds, everything was perfect. The aircraft responded beautifully. The flight dynamics exactly as designed. She began to believe they might actually pull this off. Then the malware activated. The FADEC system, which governed fuel flow and engine parameters, began issuing contradictory commands. The turbines surged. The rotor RPM spiked and dropped erratically. The yaw control became sluggish, then hypersensitive. Alexandra felt the helicopter begin to drift, the tail rotor losing authority. Warning lights cascaded across the instrument panel. She fought the controls, trying to stabilize, but the aircraft was fighting her. The storm winds amplified every instability. Rain hammered the canopy. Visibility dropped to near zero. In the control tower, Liam watched the telemetry feeds and felt his heart stop. He saw the malware signature in the data stream, recognized the pattern. Damien had triggered the failsafe remotely, probably watching the demonstration through encrypted channels, waiting for the crash that would destroy Sterling Aviation forever. Liam tried to establish a remote override to reboot the FADEC from the ground, but the storm interference was too severe. The backup communication channels were dropping packets. He could not reach her. He made a decision that took 0 seconds. He ran to the hangar, found the second V9 prototype, the one reserved for static testing. It was not certified for flight. It had not completed safety reviews, but it was functional, and it was there. He climbed into the cockpit, initiated the startup sequence from memory, and lifted off into the storm without clearance, without authorization, without a flight plan. Air traffic control was screaming at him to abort. The tower was threatening to call security. He ignored all of it. Alexandra felt the helicopter shuddering beneath her, the controls becoming increasingly unresponsive. She could see the ground approaching too fast through breaks in the clouds. Her training told her to auto-rotate, to cut power and let the rotor windmill, to trade altitude for time. But the FADEC was fighting her, refusing to release control. She thought about Liam, about Ethan, about the life she had built on foundations of arrogance and assumptions. She thought about the people who depended on Sterling Aviation for jobs and futures. And she thought about the fact that she was about to die without ever telling Liam that she loved him. Then she saw lights. Another helicopter, pulling alongside her through the storm. The second V9. And through the rain-streaked canopy, she saw Liam. He was shouting into the radio, his voice cutting through the static. "Alex, listen to me. You need to kill power to the FADEC on my count. Full shutdown. Then immediate restart. It will reboot clean. I'll lose all engine control. For 3 seconds. I'll hold formation. On my count." She looked across the gap between helicopters. 50 meters. Storm winds buffeting both aircraft. One mistake and they would collide, die together in a fireball of twisted metal and shattered dreams. But she trusted him, completely, without reservation. "I'm ready," she said. He counted down. 3, 2, 1. Kill it. She shut down the FADEC system. The engine noise changed immediately, the turbine winding down without digital governance. The helicopter began to drop. Liam matched her descent, holding position exactly, his rotor wash creating a cushion of turbulent air that kept her rotor spinning. 3 seconds felt like hours. Then the FADEC rebooted, cleared of malware, and she brought the engine back online. Power surged clean and strong. The controls responded. She was flying again, but the tail rotor was damaged, the structural integrity compromised. She could not maintain altitude. Liam saw it before she did. "Alex, you need to autoritate. I'll guide you down. The winds are too variable. I'll call the windows. Trust me." He positioned his helicopter above hers, using his rotor to deflect the worst of the wind shear, calling out airspeed and descent rate like a metronome. Alexandra followed his instructions exactly, trading altitude for rotor inertia, waiting for the moment when ground effect would give her enough lift to cushion the landing. "Now." Liam's voice was calm. "Absolute. Flare now." She pulled the collective, felt the rotor bite air, and the V9 kissed the ground with barely a shudder. Emergency vehicles were already converging. Liam sat down beside her, shut down his engine, and was out of his cockpit before the blades stopped turning. He pulled open her door. She fell into his arms, shaking, adrenaline and terror and relief all hitting at once. He held her, one hand in her platinum hair, the other pressed against her back, and whispered, "I've got you. You're safe." Behind them, the cavalry arrived. FBI agents, FAA investigators, Sterling Aviation Security. And at the center of it all, Damien Cross, attempting to leave the observation area, was stopped by federal marshals. The communication channels had been left open during the crisis. Every word Liam had spoken to Alexandra, every technical instruction, had been recorded. More importantly, the remote trigger signal that activated the malware had been traced back to an encrypted device in Damien's possession. He tried to argue, to deflect, to lawyer his way out. But the evidence was overwhelming. The modified circuit boards, the shell company payments, the security footage, the remote trigger, all of it pointed to industrial sabotage on a scale that carried federal charges. The board of directors, who had been preparing to replace Alexandra an hour earlier, now stood in stunned silence as federal agents led Damien Cross away in handcuffs. The military procurement officers, who had witnessed the entire crisis through telemetry feeds, huddled in conference. One of them approached Alexandra. "That was extraordinary airmanship, Miss Sterling. Both of you. The contract is yours. Assuming you want it." Alexandra looked at Liam, who stood quietly to the side, blood seeping through his jacket from the reopened shoulder wound. She thought about everything that had led to this moment. The arrogance, the mockery, the slow, painful awakening to her own blindness. "I want it," she said. "But not alone. Liam Carter is now Sterling Aviation's Director of Flight Safety. The contract goes forward only with his oversight." The officer nodded. Understood. That evening, after the chaos had settled and the last investigators had left, Alexandra found her father waiting in her office. General Sterling stood by the window, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. "You made me a liar," he said. "You were already a liar," Alexandra replied. "I just stopped protecting the lie." He turned to face her. That man saved my life twice, once 10 years ago, and again today, and you buried him because it was convenient." The general's jaw tightened. "There are things you don't understand about command decisions." "Then explain them." Orders came from the Senate Armed Services Committee. They wanted a scapegoat for the failed mission. Carter volunteered to take the fall to protect the chain of command, to preserve operational integrity. It was a noble sacrifice. "It was a cowardly lie," Alexandra said. "And you let it stand." For the first time in her life, she saw her father falter. The absolute certainty that had governed his entire life cracked just slightly. He accepted the terms. He signed the documents, because he believed the living needed peace more than the dead needed public justice. That doesn't make it right. It makes him better than all of us. The general was silent for a long time. Then, quietly, "What do you want me to do?" "Tell the truth. Submit a corrected after-action report. Clear his record. Give him back what you took. It will cost me." "Good." He nodded slowly. "All right, I'll make the calls." As he left, Alexandra felt something release in her chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the beginning of understanding. She found Liam in the employee lounge, his shoulder freshly bandaged. drinking terrible coffee from a styrofoam cup. Ethan was asleep on the couch beside him, exhausted from the stress of the day. Alexandra had arranged for the hospital to schedule his surgery, using Sterling Aviation's medical fund to cover the full cost. Liam did not know yet. She would tell him tomorrow. "Hey," she said softly. He looked up. "Hey, thank you. For everything. Just doing my job." She sat beside him. "That thing I said during the landing. About choosing you over the company. I meant it. I know. The offer that started all of this. The stupid joke about marrying you if you could fly the helicopter." She took a breath. "It's not a joke anymore. I'm in love with you, Liam Carter. And I don't care who knows it." He set down the coffee cup. His hand found hers. "That's still a terrible business decision. The worst one I've ever made." "Good." He leaned closer, his forehead touching hers. "Because I'm in love with you too. Have been since the moment you stopped seeing me as a janitor and started seeing me as a person." They sat in silence, listening to Ethan's soft breathing, the distant sound of wind chimes from somewhere outside, the quiet hum of the building settling. For the first time in 10 years, Alexandra felt at peace. 1 year later, Sterling Aviation hosted the Wings of Hope Gala, a scholarship fund for underprivileged students interested in aerospace engineering. The event was held on the roof of the company headquarters, where a helipad had been converted into an observation deck overlooking Seattle. The Helion V9 had been recertified and cleared for production. Military contracts were being fulfilled ahead of schedule. The company's stock had tripled, but more importantly, the culture had changed. Alexandra had restructured the entire organization, promoting from within, creating pathways for people who had been invisible before, building a company that valued character over credentials. Liam stood beside her, wearing a suit for the first time in years, his arm around her waist. He had accepted the role of chief safety officer with conditions. He would not fly operationally, he would work part-time to be present for Ethan, and he would never have an office. He still kept a maintenance cart in the hangar, still fixed things with his hands, still preferred being in the background. But now people knew his name, they knew his story, and they looked at him with respect. Ethan had come through his surgery beautifully. His heart was strong now, his energy boundless. He stood at the front of the crowd with a pair of oversized scissors, ready to cut the ribbon on the new scholarship wing. He looked back at his father and Alexandra, grinned, and gave them a thumbs up. When the formalities were complete and the guests were mingling, Alexandra pulled Liam aside to the edge of the helipad. The V9 sat nearby, its rotors still. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small box. "I have a question," she said. Liam raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" She opened the box. Inside was a platinum ring shaped like a rotor blade, elegant and geometric. "You flew the helicopter, and I said I'd marry you. So, here's my question." She knelt, reversing every tradition, claiming this moment as her own. "Liam Carter, will you marry me?" He laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "That depends. Are you going to make me fly in the ceremony?" "Only if you want to." He pulled her to her feet, kissed her in front of everyone watching, and whispered against her lips, "Yes. Absolutely yes." The applause was deafening. Ethan whooped and jumped up and down. The entire Sterling Aviation family celebrated, not just a wedding, but everything it represented. Second chances, earned respect, love that grew from truth. Later, as the sun set and the guests filtered away, the three of them stood together on the helipad. Alexandra in her red dress, Liam in his borrowed suit, Ethan between them holding both their hands. The wind lifted the hem of Alexandra's dress, carrying the scent of jet fuel and possibility. The V9's rotors turned slowly in the breeze, spinning like a calm heartbeat. "Are you scared anymore?" Ethan asked Alexandra. She looked at the helicopter, then at Liam, then down at the boy who had taught her more about courage than any boardroom ever had. "A little," she said honestly. "But I'm flying anyway, because that's what brave people do," Ethan said confidently. "Exactly." Liam squeezed her hand. "Ready to go home?" "Yeah," she said. "Let's go home." The message was simple. In the end, respect. dignity, truth. These were the forces that lifted people higher than any rotor could. These were the things that mattered. And as they walked toward the elevator, three people who had found each other across impossible distances, the wind chimes sang their quiet approval, a melody of redemption and grace.